The hardest thing about burying a military dog is when you never saw the body. The rain hammered against Ethan Cole's cabin windows hard enough to shake the glass, and somewhere deep in the Oregon mountains, thunder rolled through the trees like distant artillery. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table with an untouched cup of black coffee growing cold beside him, staring at the old photograph in his hands. The picture showed a younger version of himself kneeling beside Ghost, a full-grown German shepherd with alert ears, dark eyes, and a tactical vest wrapped tightly around his chest. The photo had survived dust storms, deployments, and years stuffed inside military bags, but now the edges were worn thin. Ethan's thumb paused over Ghost's face. 3 years ago, they told him the dog died during a classified border operation near El Paso. Explosion. Fire. No remains recovered. Closed file. End of story. At least that was the version they gave him. Ethan never believed it completely. Outside, the storm grew louder. Wind pushed through the pine trees surrounding the cabin, making the forest sound alive. Ethan leaned back slowly, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. Since leaving the tactical K-9 unit, sleep rarely lasted more than a few hours. Every noise pulled him awake. Every shadow felt familiar. Then came the sound. A single scrape outside the front porch. Ethan froze. The cabin sat nearly 20 miles from the nearest town. Nobody came here during storms. Another sound followed. Slow footsteps across wet wood. Ethan stood carefully, every instinct from his former life returning at once. His hand moved toward the flashlight near the sink. The porch light had burned out 2 weeks earlier, leaving only darkness beyond the front door. The scratching came again. Low. Patient. Not random. Ethan stepped closer. Rainwater slid beneath the doorframe. Thunder cracked overhead. Then something hit the door softly. Once. Ethan's jaw tightened. Who's there? He called. No answer. Only rain. He unlocked the door anyway. The hinges groaned as the wind forced the door open halfway, and cold mountain air flooded the cabin. For a second, Ethan saw nothing except darkness and rain, blowing sideways across the porch. Then lightning flashed across the sky. A German shepherd stood motionless in front of the cabin. Ethan stopped breathing. The dog's fur was soaked from the storm, dark with mud and streaked with something Ethan couldn't immediately identify. One ear carried the same tiny notch Ghost had gotten during a training accident years earlier. The same scar crossed the bridge of his muzzle. The same intelligent eyes locked onto Ethan without fear. Ghost. Ethan's grip on the flashlight weakened. No, he whispered. The dog didn't move. Water dripped from his coat onto the porch boards while thunder rolled again through the mountains. Ethan stepped forward slowly, barely able to process what he was seeing. Ghost. The German shepherd tilted his head slightly at the sound of the name, but something about him felt different now. Older. Hardened. Like whatever happened after that mission had changed him forever. Then Ethan noticed the blood on the dog's fur. Fresh. Not much, but enough to make his stomach tighten. Ghost suddenly turned toward the dark tree line behind the cabin. His ears lifted. His entire body went rigid. Ethan followed the dog's stare into the forest, but all he could see were endless shadows moving between the pines. Then, somewhere far beyond the rain, a car door slammed shut. The sound of the car door echoed through the forest, then everything went silent again except for the rain. Ghost remained frozen at the edge of the porch, staring into the darkness between the trees with an intensity Ethan had not seen since their deployment years earlier. The dog was not afraid. He was tracking something. Ethan slowly stepped beside him, the cold rain soaking through his gray thermal shirt almost instantly. What do you see? He whispered. Ghost gave a low growl deep in his chest. It was the kind of warning sound that used to make entire tactical teams stop moving. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a faint light flickered between the pines. Headlights. Far away, but close enough to reach the cabin within minutes. Ghost suddenly backed toward the doorway and nudged Ethan's leg hard with his nose. Once. Then again. Ethan understood immediately. Inside. Now. The old instincts returned without thought. Ethan shut the cabin door quietly and killed the kitchen light. Darkness swallowed the room except for occasional flashes of lightning outside the windows. Ghost moved silently through the cabin, checking each corner with practiced precision before stopping near the front window. Ethan grabbed the old pair of binoculars hanging near the fireplace and carefully lifted one corner of the curtain. Two headlights moved slowly along the narrow dirt road leading toward the cabin. Black SUV. No emergency lights. No markings. Ethan felt tension spread across his shoulders. Almost nobody knew this place existed. He had paid cash for the cabin after leaving the unit specifically to disappear. Ghost stared at the approaching vehicle without blinking. Rainwater still dripped from his fur onto the wooden floor. Ethan noticed fresh scratches along the dog's side beneath the wet coat, but Ghost ignored the injuries completely. The vehicle stopped about 100 yards down the road. Engine running. Headlights cutting through the storm. Nobody stepped out. Ethan narrowed his eyes. That is not local law enforcement, he muttered. Ghost's ears twitched suddenly toward the old police scanner sitting beside the fireplace. Static crackled through the speaker before a woman's voice broke in. County units responding to a missing child report near Blackwood Bridge. Female, 8 years old. Last seen 40 minutes ago. Ethan listened carefully while Ghost moved closer to the radio. Then the dispatcher said a single name. Emily Harper. The reaction was immediate. Ghost snapped his head toward the scanner and let out a sharp bark that made Ethan flinch. The German Shepherd began pacing fast across the cabin floor, claws scraping against the wood. His breathing changed. Focused. Urgent. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. You know that name? Ghost stopped pacing and looked directly at Ethan. For a moment, the years between them disappeared. Ethan saw the same combat dog who once identified threats before satellites did. The same partner who had saved his life more than once along. The border. Outside, the SUV headlights suddenly switched off. Total darkness covered the road. Ethan's pulse spiked. Stay here, he whispered. He reached for the shotgun locked beside the fireplace, but paused halfway. Ghost was already moving toward the back door. Determined. Focused on something far beyond the cabin walls. Ethan frowned. Where are you going? Ghost looked back once, rain tapping softly against the windows behind him. Then the dog scratched at the back door twice. Not nervous. Intentional. Ethan understood the signal immediately. Ghost wanted him to follow. Somewhere deep in the forest, beyond the storm and beyond Blackwood Bridge, something had started moving again. Dogs do not return from the dead unless something unfinished is waiting for them. Ethan pulled on his old weatherproof jacket while Ghost waited motionless beside the back door, rainwater dripping from his thick fur onto the cabin floor. The storm outside had grown worse. Wind tore through the mountains hard enough to bend the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again across the valley. Ethan grabbed a flashlight, clipped a hunting knife to his belt out of habit, and opened the back door carefully. Cold air rushed inside instantly. Ghost stepped into the darkness without hesitation. Ethan followed close behind. The forest behind the cabin sloped downhill toward Blackwood Bridge nearly 2 miles away. The narrow trail was muddy and slick from the rain, but Ghost moved through it like he already knew exactly where he was going. Every few seconds, the German Shepherd paused to sniff the air before continuing deeper between the trees. Ethan struggled to keep up. Easy boy, he whispered. Ghost ignored him. His focus never broke. Ethan noticed something else now. Ghost was limping slightly on his back right leg. Old injury. The same leg injured during their final deployment together. Ethan's stomach tightened again. There was no way this could be another dog. No chance. Lightning flashed overhead, briefly illuminating the forest around them in pale white light. Ethan stopped walking for a second when he noticed tire tracks pressed deep into the mud beside the trail. Fresh tracks. Large vehicle. Probably the SUV from earlier. Ghost saw them too. The dog lowered his head and growled softly before moving faster downhill. Branches snapped somewhere ahead. Ethan froze instantly and killed the flashlight. Silence. Rain tapping against leaves. Wind moving through the trees. Then came another sound. A child crying. Faint. Barely audible beneath the storm. Ghost bolted forward immediately. Ethan ran after him through the mud, nearly slipping on wet rocks as the trail narrowed toward the river below. The sound of rushing water grew louder with every step. Blackwood Bridge finally appeared through the trees ahead, stretching across the river like a dark skeleton under the storm clouds. Old steel beams creaked in the wind. Ghost stopped near the edge of the bridge and stared downward beneath it. Ethan approached slowly, breathing hard from the run. Then he heard it again, crying, directly below them. Ethan climbed carefully down the muddy embankment beside the bridge, grabbing roots and rocks to steady himself. Ghost stayed close, scanning the darkness constantly. Beneath the bridge, hidden beside the concrete supports, a little girl sat curled beneath a torn blue raincoat. She could not have been older than 8. Her blonde hair was soaked from the storm, and her small hands trembled from the cold. The moment she saw Ethan, she flinched backward in fear. But when Ghost stepped into view behind him, her expression changed immediately. "The dog found me," she whispered. Ethan knelt slowly a few feet away. "Emily." The girl nodded weakly. Ethan exchanged a stunned look with Ghost. The German shepherd moved closer to the child and sat beside her protectively without making a sound. Emily reached out carefully and touched the wet fur on his neck. "He stayed with me," she whispered again. Ethan's mind raced. How had Ghost found her before local search teams? Why did the dog react to her name on the radio? Then Ethan noticed something lying beside the girl in the mud. A black patch with faded lettering across it. Tactical issue. Military grade. Ethan picked it up slowly. The rain washed dirt across the fabric as the old symbol became visible under his flashlight beam. Ethan's face went pale instantly. He recognized the insignia. It belonged to his former unit. The patch felt heavier in Ethan's hand than it should have. Rainwater rolled off the black fabric while the faded insignia stared back at him like a ghost from another life. Task Force Orion. His old unit. Officially disbanded 2 years earlier after a classified operation near the border ended in disaster. Ethan had not seen that symbol since the night Ghost supposedly died. His pulse slowed into the cold, controlled rhythm he used to feel before missions. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Emily looked up at him with frightened eyes. "A man dropped it," she whispered. "He was looking for me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What man?" Before the girl could answer, Ghost suddenly stood and turned toward the woods beyond the bridge. His ears lifted sharply, completely alert. Ethan saw it instantly. The dog had heard something coming through the storm. Headlights appeared above the bridge. White beams cutting through the rain. Another vehicle. Ethan moved fast. "Stay behind me," he told Emily. The little girl grabbed Ghost's fur instinctively as the sound of tires rolled slowly across the bridge overhead. Not local police. Too careful. Too quiet. Ethan killed his flashlight and guided Emily deeper beneath the bridge supports where shadows hid them from view. Ghost remained near the edge, watching upward through the rain with perfect focus. Footsteps crossed the bridge above. Slow and measured. Ethan held his breath. Water rushed beneath the steel beams while thunder echoed across the valley. Then came a voice. "Male. Calm. Emily." The little girl trembled beside Ethan. "That is him," she whispered. Ethan looked upward carefully through the gaps in the bridge. A tall figure stood near the railing holding a flashlight low beside his leg. Dark jacket. Baseball cap. No badge visible. The man scanned the river below without speaking again. Ghost let out a deep growl under his breath. Ethan placed one hand gently against the dog's shoulder. "Not yet," he whispered. The man above stayed perfectly still for several seconds before speaking into a radio. "She is not here." Static crackled faintly in response, but Ethan could not make out the reply over the storm. Then the man walked back toward the vehicle. Moments later, the engine faded into the distance. Only after the sound disappeared completely did Ethan finally breathe again. Emily looked up at him. "He was at my house before the storm," she whispered. "Mom told me to hide." Ethan frowned. "Where is your mother?" The girl shook her head slowly. "I do not know." Ghost stepped closer to Emily again and nudged her hand softly with his nose. The small gesture changed everything in the little girl's expression. Fear eased slightly from her face for the first time since Ethan found her. Ghost remembered how to comfort people. Just like before. Ethan stared at the German shepherd in disbelief. 3 years missing. Officially dead. Yet somehow the dog still moved like a trained operator. Still protected civilians. Still identified threats before Ethan could even hear them. None of it made sense. Lightning flashed overhead again, illuminating the bridge in harsh white light. That was when Ethan noticed fresh tire tracks leading beneath the far side of the bridge toward an abandoned service road hidden behind the trees. Ghost noticed them too. The dog immediately started pulling toward the trail. Ethan frowned. "No chance," he muttered. "You already found the girl." But Ghost kept staring down the hidden road without moving. Focused. Intentional. Then the German shepherd barked once and began sniffing the mud near the tire tracks. Ethan stepped closer and saw something reflecting beneath the rainwater. A silver chain necklace. Small, delicate, definitely belonging to a woman. Emily looked at it and immediately covered her mouth. That is my mom's. Rain poured through the trees as Ethan stared at the silver necklace resting in his palm. Tiny drops of water clung to the chain while Emily tried to hold back tears beside him. Ghost remained focused on the hidden service road, his body tense and ready like he already knew where it led. Ethan clipped the necklace carefully into his jacket pocket and looked down at the little girl. Emily, listen to me, he said. Softly. I need you to tell me exactly what happened before you ran. Emily wiped rainwater from her face with shaking hands. Mom heard somebody outside the house, she whispered. She told me to hide under the bridge if anything happened. Ethan exchanged another glance with Ghost. The dog paced once near the muddy trail before stopping again. Waiting. Ethan could feel the old instincts building stronger inside him with every minute. This was no random missing person case. Somebody connected to his old unit was here in the mountains. Somebody hunting civilians during the middle of a storm. Thunder cracked overhead again. Ethan looked toward the narrow service road disappearing deeper into the forest. How far does this road go? He asked. Emily pointed weakly through the rain. There is an old ranger station near the lake. Nobody uses it anymore. Ghost immediately started moving forward. Ethan sighed quietly. Of course you already knew that. The German shepherd glanced back once before continuing down the muddy trail. Ethan guided Emily carefully beside him as they followed. The forest grew darker the farther they walked. Thick pine branches blocked most of the moonlight, and fog rolled low between the trees from the river below. Every sound felt amplified. Wet boots against mud, wind through branches, Ghost moving silently ahead of them like a shadow. After nearly 15 minutes, Ethan spotted something ahead through the rain. Light. Faint yellow light glowing between the trees. He crouched immediately and pulled Emily down beside him. Ghost froze without needing a command. Ethan studied the area carefully. An old ranger station sat near the edge of the lake about 60 yards ahead. Most of the windows were boarded shut, but one side room still glowed dimly from inside. 2 black SUVs were parked outside. Ethan's stomach tightened. Same vehicles. Same operation. Ghost sniffed the air and let out another low growl. Ethan placed one hand gently against the dog's neck. Easy. Then he noticed movement near the station. A man stepped outside holding a flashlight while speaking into a radio. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Military posture. Controlled movements. Definitely trained. The man looked toward the lake briefly before disappearing back inside. Emily grabbed Ethan's sleeve tightly. My mom is in there, she whispered. Ethan stayed silent for several seconds. He counted windows, entry points, vehicles, habits from his former life returning automatically. Then something caught his attention near the station fence. A large metal sign half covered by weeds and rust. Ethan focused harder through the rain. His blood ran cold instantly. Orion Wilderness Research Division. The same name used as cover during Task Force Orion field operations years earlier. Ethan looked at Ghost slowly. This place belongs to them. Ghost stared directly at the building, completely focused. Ethan suddenly remembered the final mission near El Paso. The explosion. The missing files. The classified reports that disappeared afterward. He remembered arguing with command about civilian transport routes being used near operational zones. Then he remembered the warning one senior officer gave him before he resigned. Some things are buried for a reason. Lightning flashed across the lake. For half a second, Ethan saw a silhouette standing inside the ranger station window. Female, hands tied in front of her. Emily gasped beside him. Mom. At that exact moment, Ghost's ears snapped toward the forest behind them. Ethan turned instantly. Footsteps were approaching through the darkness. The footsteps behind them moved slowly through the wet forest, steady and deliberate. Ethan lowered himself deeper behind the fallen logs near the lake, while Ghost silently shifted position beside him. Emily clung tightly to Ethan's sleeve, trying not to breathe too loudly. Rain tapped against leaves overhead, mixing with the distant sound of waves hitting the rocky shoreline. Then a flashlight beam cut through the trees behind them. Ethan narrowed his eyes carefully. One person, maybe two. Hard to tell through the fog. Ghost's ears stayed locked forward, every muscle tense beneath his soaked fur. The German shepherd was waiting for a command Ethan had not given in years. Stay, Ethan whispered softly. Ghost did not move. The flashlight beam drifted closer between the trees before suddenly stopping. Silence followed. Ethan's pulse slowed into combat rhythm again. Somebody knew they were here. Then came a familiar sound. Static from a handheld radio. North perimeter clear, a male voice whispered. No visual on the girl. Ethan felt cold anger settle into his chest. They were searching the woods already. Emily looked up at him fearfully. Are they going to find us? She whispered. Ethan shook his head once. Not if we stay smart. Ghost suddenly turned his head toward the ranger station again. Ethan followed the dog's line of sight and saw movement inside the lit room. The woman near the window stumbled briefly before another shadow crossed in front of her. Emily almost cried out, but Ethan covered her mouth gently. Quiet. The little girl nodded quickly, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. Ethan studied the ranger station more carefully now. The structure itself was old, but parts of it had been renovated recently. New generators, fresh security lights near the vehicles, satellite antenna mounted on the roof. This was not abandoned. It was active, hidden, operational, just like the old Orion sites near the border years ago. Ethan's jaw tightened as memories surfaced. Unmarked facilities, off-the-record transport routes, civilian names erased from reports. He remembered questioning command after families disappeared near operational zones. Nobody answered him. 2 days later came the mission that supposedly killed Ghost. Ethan had spent 3 years convincing himself it was coincidence. Now he knew better. A branch snapped somewhere behind them. Closer this time. Ethan slowly reached toward the hunting knife on his belt while Ghost lowered himself silently into the wet brush. Invisible. The flashlight beam reappeared only 30 feet away now, sweeping across the trees. Ethan could hear boots crushing wet leaves. Then the radio crackled again. Bring the dog team around the lake. Ethan froze instantly. Dog team. That meant trained tracking dogs. Ghost heard it too. The German shepherd looked back at Ethan with an expression that almost felt human. Focused. Calculating. Then Ghost quietly nudged Emily with his nose. Before looking toward the far side of the lake, Ethan understood immediately. The dog had found an escape route. You still think 3 steps ahead, Ethan whispered. Another flashlight beam suddenly appeared from the opposite side of the woods. They were being surrounded. Ghost stood carefully and began moving low through the brush along the shoreline. Ethan guided Emily beside him while staying close behind the German shepherd. The freezing lake water crashed softly against rocks inches from their boots as they moved through darkness. Then Ghost stopped so suddenly Ethan nearly collided with him. Ahead, hidden behind thick trees near the shoreline, stood a second structure Ethan had not seen before. Smaller. Concrete walls. No windows. Heavy steel door. A red security light blinked faintly beside it through the rain. Ghost stared directly at the building and growled low in his throat. Ethan's face slowly changed as realization hit him. He knew exactly what this place was. It was not a ranger station. It was a holding facility. The red security light blinked steadily through the rain while Ethan stared at the concrete structure hidden beside the lake. Memories he had spent years trying to bury came rushing back all at once. Temporary holding sites. Remote facilities without records. Places where people disappeared before official reports were ever written. Orion used locations like this during covert operations near the border. But those missions were supposed to be over. Ghost stepped closer to the steel door and sniffed near the bottom edge. His body language changed instantly. Focused. Alert. Ethan recognized it immediately. Human scent inside. Emily clutched Ethan's jacket tightly. Is my mom in there? She whispered. Ethan looked toward the ranger station through the trees. Flashlights still moved near the main building as search teams spread around the lake. Time was running out. Maybe, Ethan answered quietly. Ghost suddenly pawed once against the steel door before looking back at Ethan. The German shepherd knew something important was inside. Ethan examined the keypad mounted beside the entrance. Modern hardware. Recently installed. Water rolled down the concrete walls while thunder shook the mountains overhead. They upgraded this place, Ethan muttered. Then Ghost's ears twitched sharply toward the forest behind them. Voices. Getting closer. Ethan crouched lower beside Emily while Ghost slipped silently into the shadows near the building corner. The voices approached fast now. 2 men. One carrying a flashlight. Tracks came this way, somebody said through the storm. Ethan's pulse remained steady. He watched the moving beam sweep between the trees, only 40 feet away now. Emily trembled beside him. Then everything happened at once. Ghost burst from the darkness with terrifying speed, barking loudly near the opposite side of the shoreline before vanishing back into the trees again. The sudden noise startled both men instantly. "There!" one of them shouted. Flashlights swung wildly toward the sound as footsteps crashed through the brush, chasing after Ghost. Within seconds, the search team disappeared deeper into the forest away from the lake. Silence returned. Ethan stared into the darkness where Ghost vanished. Even after 3 years, the dog still knew tactical diversion patterns perfectly. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Good boy." Emily looked confused. "He left us?" Ethan shook his head once. "No. He is buying us time." Ethan quickly turned back toward the keypad beside the steel door. The old Orion facilities always used backup mechanical systems during storms in case generators failed. He searched along the concrete wall until his fingers brushed beneath a loose metal panel hidden near the frame. Exactly where he remembered. Ethan pulled the cover loose and exposed an emergency override latch underneath. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered. Orion never changed anything. He forced the latch downward. A soft buzz echoed from inside the structure. Then the heavy lock clicked open. Cold air rushed out immediately. The smell inside stopped Ethan cold. Antiseptic chemicals. Wet concrete. Metal. Exactly like the border facilities years ago. Emily stepped closer nervously. "What is this place?" Ethan stared into the darkness beyond the doorway. A place nobody was supposed to find. Emergency lights flickered dim red inside the narrow hallway. Old pipes lined the ceiling while water dripped steadily somewhere deeper underground. Ethan guided Emily carefully beside him and stepped inside. The steel door closed softly behind them. The hallway stretched forward nearly 50 feet before turning sharply left. Then came the sound. A weak voice echoing through the concrete corridor ahead. "Female. Frightened. Help me." Emily's eyes widened instantly. "Mom." She started running forward, but Ghost suddenly appeared out of the darkness behind them and blocked her path. The German shepherd stood rigid in the hallway, staring toward the unseen corner ahead while a deep growl rumbled through his chest. Ethan's blood turned cold immediately. Ghost was warning them. Someone else was already inside. The hallway fell completely silent except for the hum of old ventilation fans somewhere deeper underground. Ghost stood frozen beneath the red emergency lights, staring toward the corner ahead with unwavering focus. Ethan trusted that look more than any weapon he had ever carried. If Ghost sensed danger, danger was there. Emily clung tightly to Ethan's side, her small hands trembling from fear and cold. Then the voice came again from deeper inside the corridor. "Emily. Weak. Exhausted. Definitely female." Emily's eyes filled with tears instantly. "Mom," she whispered. Ethan crouched beside her carefully. "Listen to me. Stay behind Ghost no matter what happens." The little girl nodded quickly. Ghost moved forward first, silent as a shadow across the concrete floor. Ethan followed slowly behind him, every nerve alert. The hallway turned sharply left after 20 feet, opening into a larger underground chamber lined with metal doors and old equipment racks. Half the ceiling lights flickered weakly above pools of water on the floor. Ethan immediately recognized the layout. Temporary containment area. Orion built dozens of places exactly like this near operational zones. But one thing was different here. There were children's drawings taped beside one of the desks near the far wall. Crayon sketches. Family photos. Somebody had been living here recently. Ethan's stomach tightened. This was not just a military site anymore. It was being used for something else. Ghost stopped near the center of the room and sniffed the air carefully. Then he turned toward a closed door at the far end of the chamber. The voice came from behind it. "Emily." Ethan approached slowly. A small reinforced window sat near eye level on the steel door. He looked inside and saw a woman sitting against the wall with her wrists restrained loosely in front of her. Blonde hair. Exhausted face. Early 30s. The moment she saw Emily through the window, tears filled her eyes instantly. "Emily." Ethan quickly unlocked the door using the emergency release beside the frame. The woman rushed forward the second it opened and wrapped her daughter tightly in her arms. Both of them cried quietly while Ghost stood nearby watching the hallway behind them. Ethan gave them only a few seconds before turning back toward the room. Something still felt wrong. Too quiet. Too easy. He searched the nearby desks carefully until he found a stack of folders covered in water stains and Orion markings. Most files were empty, but one photograph nearly stopped his heart. Ethan picked it up slowly beneath the red emergency light. The picture showed Ghost wearing full tactical gear beside a row of cages. Date stamped 3 years ago, 2 months after the mission where the dog supposedly died. Ethan stared at the image in disbelief. Ghost had been alive the entire time. Held here. Used here. Another file beside the photograph contained transport schedules and civilian names, including Emily Harper and her mother, Rachel Harper. Ethan's jaw tightened. Witness relocation lists. Surveillance reports. Somebody inside Orion had been tracking civilians connected to old operations. Ethan. Rachel's frightened voice pulled him back. You need to see this. She pointed toward a computer monitor still glowing faintly near the back wall. Ethan stepped closer. Security footage played silently across the screen. Timestamp from earlier that night. He watched 2 men escort Rachel into the holding room. Then a third figure entered behind them. Ethan froze instantly. White male. Late 50s. Gray tactical jacket. Military posture. Ethan recognized him immediately. Colonel Nathan Briggs. Former Orion commander. The man who personally informed Ethan that Ghost died during the border explosion. Rachel looked at Ethan nervously. That man kept asking about the dog, she whispered. Ghost suddenly growled low again, this time louder. Ethan turned sharply toward the hallway just as the overhead speakers crackled to life with static. Then a calm voice echoed through the underground facility. Welcome back, Sergeant Cole. The voice echoed through the underground facility with calm confidence, as if the man behind it had been waiting for this moment for years. Welcome back, Sergeant Cole. Ethan slowly looked toward the ceiling speaker while Ghost stepped protectively in front of Emily and Rachel. The German shepherd's growl deepened, low and steady beneath the hum of the emergency lights. Ethan's jaw tightened. Briggs, he said quietly. Static crackled for a second before the voice returned. You disappeared without permission 3 years ago. I was beginning to think you lost your survival instincts. Ethan glanced toward the security monitor again. Colonel Nathan Briggs stared back from the frozen footage with the same cold expression Ethan remembered from the border operations. Controlled. Emotionless. Dangerous. Rachel stepped closer nervously. Who is he? Ethan did not take his eyes off the monitor. The man who buried this entire operation. The speaker clicked again. That is not entirely accurate, Briggs replied. I buried the parts that became inconvenient. Ghost suddenly barked once toward the hallway entrance. Ethan immediately understood why. Footsteps. Multiple people approaching from deeper in the facility. Ethan grabbed the stack of Orion files from the desk and shoved them into an old equipment bag hanging nearby. If Briggs wanted these records hidden, they mattered. We are leaving, Ethan whispered. Rachel nodded quickly while holding Emily close against her side. Ghost moved first, leading them toward another corridor branching away from the main chamber. Ethan followed behind, flashlight low beside his leg. The underground halls twisted deeper beneath. The lake, lined with rusted pipes and faded warning signs. Some doors stood open, revealing abandoned bunk rooms and storage areas filled with old tactical crates. Others remained locked tight. The deeper they moved, the more Ethan realized this facility was far larger than it appeared from outside. Orion had expanded it over time, hidden beneath the mountains, hidden from everyone. Then Ghost stopped suddenly beside a heavy steel, door-marked K-9 training unit. Ethan froze. Memories hit him instantly. Long nights running drills beside Ghost near desert compounds. Obstacle courses. Tactical scent training. Remote command systems. Ghost pushed his nose gently against the bottom of the door and whined softly for the first time since returning. Ethan slowly opened it. The room beyond was dark except for a single flickering light near the far wall. Empty kennels lined both sides of the chamber. Most doors hung open. Some still carried faded name tags beside them. Then Ethan saw it. Ghost's old tactical harness resting neatly on a metal table near the back of the room. Cleaned. Preserved. Waiting. Ethan approached slowly and picked it up with shaking hands. The harness still carried Ghost's old service number stitched into the side. K9-07. Ethan swallowed hard. They kept you here, he whispered. Ghost stepped beside him silently. The dog stared toward the empty kennels with an expression Ethan had never seen before. Not fear. Recognition. Then the overhead speakers crackled again. "He was exceptional," Briggs said calmly. "Even after the border incident." Ethan's anger sharpened instantly. "You lied about his death." "No," Briggs replied. "I protected valuable government property." Rachel looked horrified. Emily buried her face against her mother's shoulder. Ghost lowered his head slightly, ears twitching toward distant movement outside the room. Ethan heard it too now. Metal doors slamming somewhere deeper underground. Search teams moving closer. Briggs spoke again, quieter this time. "You should not have come back here, Ethan. Some lines exist for a reason." Ethan clipped Ghost's old harness gently back onto the German Shepherd. The moment the straps settled into place, Ghost changed completely. His posture straightened. Focus sharpened. Like an old soldier stepping back into uniform one final time. Then the facility lights suddenly shut off. Total darkness swallowed the underground corridors. Darkness swallowed the underground facility so completely that Ethan could hear Rachel and Emily breathing beside him. Somewhere deeper in the tunnels, metal doors slammed shut one after another. Automatic lockdown. Ghost stood perfectly still near Ethan's leg, silent and alert. Then faint red emergency lights flickered back on across the hallway outside the K9 room. Dim enough to barely see, bright enough to move. Ethan immediately grabbed the equipment bag full of Orion files and slung it over his shoulder. "Stay close to me," he whispered. Rachel held Emily tightly while Ghost moved into the corridor first. The German Shepherd's paws made almost no sound against the wet concrete floor. Ethan followed behind him carefully, scanning every shadow ahead. The underground tunnels felt alive now. Ventilation fans hummed louder through the walls, while warning alarms echoed faintly somewhere in the distance. Briggs was sealing the facility. Ethan knew what that meant. No witnesses leaving. Ghost suddenly stopped beside an old security map mounted near the hallway corner. Ethan flashed his light across it quickly. The facility extended beneath the lake in multiple directions, but one route caught his attention immediately. Emergency maintenance tunnel leading toward the western shoreline. Possible exit point. "This way," Ethan whispered. They moved deeper underground through narrow concrete corridors lined with rusted pipes dripping water from the storm above. Emily stayed remarkably quiet despite the fear in her eyes. Ghost remained beside her almost constantly, glancing back every few seconds as if making sure she was still there. Ethan noticed it immediately. The dog had shifted into protection mode completely. Same behavior from combat zones years ago whenever civilians were nearby. Then voices echoed ahead through the tunnel. "Search teams. Close." Ethan quickly guided Rachel and Emily behind an old maintenance generator while Ghost crouched low beside the wall. Flashlight beams swept across the corridor seconds later. Two men in dark tactical jackets passed through the intersection ahead, carrying radios and scanning every hallway carefully. Ethan remained perfectly still. So did Ghost. One wrong sound would expose them instantly. The men disappeared around the next corner. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then Ghost suddenly lifted his head toward a nearby room with shattered glass windows. Ethan frowned and stepped closer. Inside sat an abandoned operations office covered in dust and old equipment. Computer monitors flickered weakly beneath emergency power. Maps covered the walls. But one thing immediately caught Ethan's attention. A large photograph pinned beside the main desk. Border Sector 7. El Paso Operation Zone. The mission where Ghost supposedly died. Ethan stepped into the room slowly. His heartbeat quickened as he saw red circles marked across civilian transport routes near the operation area. Then he noticed another document beneath the photograph. Casualty Report Revision. Ethan grabbed the file and read the first page under his flashlight beam. The explosion near the border had not been an accident. Orion intentionally redirected civilian vehicles away from the official evacuation route to conceal unauthorized operations near the crossing zone. Ethan's face hardened. Innocent people had been placed directly in danger to protect classified activities. Then came the final line near the bottom of the report. K9 Unit 7 survived initial blast and was transferred for behavioral evaluation under Colonel Briggs' authorization. Ethan looked slowly toward Ghost. The German Shepherd stood in the doorway, watching him quietly. 3 years. 3 years trapped inside this nightmare, while Ethan believed his partner was dead. Ethan clenched the report tightly in his hand. Rage mixed with guilt inside his chest. Rachel looked over his shoulder at the documents. They covered everything up, she whispered. Before Ethan could answer, the overhead speakers crackled again. Briggs sounded closer this time. Calm. Patient. You always ask too many questions, Ethan. Ghost growled low beside the doorway. Then a loud metallic bang echoed through the tunnel behind them. Footsteps. Fast. Search teams were closing in. The footsteps behind them grew louder with every second, echoing through the narrow concrete tunnels beneath the lake. Flashlight beams bounced across the hallway walls, while radios crackled with overlapping voices. Ethan shoved the classified reports into the equipment bag and motioned for Rachel and Emily to move. Western Tunnel, he whispered. Ghost immediately took point again, leading them deeper into the underground maze. Red emergency lights flickered overhead, while warning alarms continued pulsing through the facility. Somewhere far above them, thunder shook the mountains. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling pipes onto the concrete floor. The entire structure felt unstable now. Ethan glanced behind them once and saw flashlight beams sweep across the operations office they had just left. Search teams were only moments away. Ghost suddenly turned sharply into a maintenance corridor barely wide enough for two people. The passage sloped downward beneath the lake itself, colder and darker than the upper levels. Ethan could hear water moving behind the walls now. Rachel struggled to keep pace while holding Emily close beside her. How much farther? She whispered breathlessly. Ethan studied the faded signs along the tunnel walls. Not far. Then the speakers crackled again. Briggs sounded calmer than ever. You still do not understand what you are carrying, Ethan. Ghost growled softly without slowing down. Briggs continued. Those files expose operations tied to multiple agencies. If they become public, people far above me disappear. Ethan's face hardened. Good. Static hissed through the speakers. Then Briggs spoke again, quieter this time. You always believed this was about right and wrong. That was your weakness. Ethan ignored him and kept moving. But deep down, part of him remembered the exact moment everything changed years ago. The border mission. The missing civilians. The false reports. He had started asking questions nobody wanted answered. That was when Ghost disappeared. That was when Ethan was pushed out. The tunnel. Ahead suddenly widened into an old maintenance chamber filled with rusted machinery and broken pipes. Ghost stopped instantly near the center of the room. His ears lifted sharply. Ethan froze too. Something was wrong. Then flashlight beams exploded across the chamber entrance behind them. Stop right there, somebody shouted. Rachel gasped and pulled Emily close. Ethan moved immediately, guiding them behind a row of massive water pumps near the far wall, while Ghost remained standing in the open. Calm. Focused. Ethan's pulse surged. Ghost. The German shepherd barked loudly toward the opposite side of the chamber and sprinted into the darkness between the machinery. The search team instantly chased after him. Flashlights swung wildly through the shadows as boots pounded across the wet concrete floor. Ghost was pulling them away on purpose again. Ethan understood immediately. Move now, he whispered. He spotted a narrow service ladder leading upward beside a broken maintenance hatch near the back wall. Cold air drifted down from above. Exit tunnel. Rachel climbed first with Emily, while Ethan stayed below watching the chamber entrance. Distant shouts echoed somewhere beyond the machinery as Ghost continued drawing the search teams deeper underground. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. The dog was risking everything to buy them time. Again, just like before. Rachel reached the top and forced the maintenance hatch open. Rain poured down instantly through the opening. We are outside, she called softly. Ethan climbed halfway up the ladder before stopping suddenly. Ghost had not returned. The chamber below fell strangely quiet. Too quiet. Then Ethan heard it. A single bark echoing from somewhere deeper underground. Short, sharp, deliberate. The old recall signal Ghost used during tactical operations. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. The dog was telling him to keep moving. Rachel looked down at him fearfully. Where is he? Ethan stared into the darkness below while rainwater dripped through the hatch overhead. Every instinct inside him screamed to go back. Then the speakers crackled one final time. Briggs sounded closer than ever now. He stayed because he was trained to protect you. Ethan's jaw tightened as thunder exploded overhead. Then somewhere deep in the underground tunnels, all the emergency lights suddenly went black. Rain crashed through the open maintenance hatch as Ethan climbed out of the underground tunnel onto the rocky western shoreline of the lake. Cold wind tore across the mountains while thunder rolled endlessly above the forest. Rachel pulled Emily close beneath the trees, both of them soaked and exhausted. But Ethan could not move. He stood beside the open hatch, staring down into the darkness below, listening for another sound from Ghost. Nothing came back. Only silence. Rachel stepped toward him carefully. Ethan, he shook his head immediately. He is still down there. The words barely left his mouth before distant lights suddenly appeared across the lake near the ranger station. Vehicles. More than before. Search teams spreading through the storm. Ethan knew what happened next if they stayed. Briggs would erase every witness before sunrise. He looked down at Emily holding tightly onto her mother's hand. Then he looked back into the darkness beneath the hatch. His chest felt heavy with the same guilt he carried for 3 years. He left Ghost behind once already. He would not do it again. Ethan pulled the equipment bag from his shoulder and handed it to Rachel. Inside those files is everything, he said. Take Emily and get to Sheriff Dalton in Blackwood County. Do not trust anyone else. Rachel stared at him in disbelief. You are going back? Ethan nodded once. I have to finish this. Emily's eyes filled with tears instantly. The dogs saved me, she whispered. Ethan looked toward the dark forest surrounding the lake. I know. Thunder shook the mountains again as Ethan climbed back down into the underground tunnel alone. The deeper he descended, the colder the air became. Emergency lights remained dead now, leaving only darkness and distant warning alarms echoing through the facility. Ethan used his flashlight sparingly while moving through the flooded maintenance corridors. Water reached his boots in some sections as leaking pipes poured into the tunnels. The place was falling apart. Then, he heard it. A faint bark somewhere ahead. Weak this time. Ethan moved faster immediately, following the sound through twisting hallways until he reached the large maintenance chamber where Ghost distracted the search teams earlier. Flashlight beams flickered across the room from abandoned gear lying on the floor. Ethan scanned the darkness desperately. Ghost. For one terrible second, nothing answered. Then the German shepherd slowly emerged from behind the machinery near the far wall, limping heavily, wet fur streaked with dirt and grease. But alive. Ethan dropped to one knee instantly as Ghost approached him. The dog pressed his head gently against Ethan's chest while breathing hard. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, gripping the old tactical harness tightly. You stubborn idiot, he whispered. Ghost looked up at him with tired but steady eyes. Then overhead speakers crackled one final time. Briggs again. Closer now. You always choose loyalty over survival, Ethan. Ethan stood slowly beside Ghost and looked toward the dark hallway ahead. And you always hide behind other people. Silence followed for several seconds. Then a heavy steel door opened somewhere deeper inside the facility. Ethan and Ghost moved together through the shadows until they reached the central operations chamber near the heart of the underground complex. Emergency backup lights flickered weakly overhead. Colonel Briggs stood alone beside the main control consoles wearing a dark tactical jacket, calm as ever despite the collapsing facility around him. You could have walked away tonight, Briggs said quietly. Ethan stared at the man who destroyed countless lives to protect hidden operations. Not anymore. Briggs glanced toward Ghost. That animal was engineered for obedience. Yet somehow he kept returning to you. Ethan rested one hand against Ghost's neck. Because he was never yours. Warning sirens suddenly intensified throughout the underground structure. Red emergency lights began flashing rapidly along the walls. Briggs looked toward the control monitors with sudden concern. The storm damaged the containment generators, he muttered. Ethan realized immediately what that meant. The underground facility beneath the lake was starting to flood. Warning sirens screamed through the underground facility while freezing lake water burst through cracked pipes along the ceiling. Red emergency lights flashed across the operations chamber as Colonel Briggs stared at the failing control monitors with growing panic behind his calm expression. Ethan remained beside Ghost near the doorway, every instinct focused on survival now. The entire structure beneath the lake was collapsing. Briggs stepped toward the main console and typed rapidly across the controls. The western tunnels are flooding first, he muttered. If the containment walls fail, this entire section goes under. Ethan glanced toward the rising water already spreading across the floor. Ghost stood firmly beside him despite his injuries, ears locked on Briggs. The German Shepherd no longer looked like a missing military asset. He looked like what he had always been, Ethan's partner. Briggs suddenly turned toward Ethan again. You still have time to leave. Ethan stared at him coldly. What about everyone else connected to this place? Briggs hesitated for the first time all night. Some operations cannot survive exposure. Ethan took one slow step forward. People died because you protected secrets. Briggs looked exhausted suddenly. Older than Ethan remembered. You think the world is clean, Sergeant? You think borders stay secure because of speeches and paperwork? Water surged harder beneath the control room doors as thunder shook the mountains overhead. Ethan did not answer. He already knew the world was ugly. That was never the problem. The problem was people deciding innocent lives were acceptable collateral damage. Ghost suddenly barked sharply toward the east hallway. Ethan turned immediately and saw water rushing fast through the corridor toward them. The facility was seconds from catastrophic failure. Briggs looked at the flooding hallway and finally lowered his shoulders in defeat. Go, he said quietly. Ethan frowned. You are coming with us. Briggs gave a tired smile that barely looked human anymore. No. Then he reached into his jacket slowly and removed a small data drive. Take this. Ethan stepped forward cautiously and accepted it. Briggs looked toward Ghost one final time. He never responded to any handler after you disappeared, he admitted quietly. No matter what we tried. Ethan rested one hand gently against the German Shepherd's neck. Ghost never took his eyes off Briggs. Sirens screamed louder now. Water burst through another section of ceiling pipes overhead. Briggs stepped back toward the control consoles while emergency lights flickered violently around him. There is a surface access tunnel behind this room, he said. It leads to the northern ridge. Ethan realized what Briggs intended instantly. You are sealing the facility. Briggs nodded once. Some things deserve to stay buried. Ethan wanted to argue. Wanted answers for 3 lost years. Wanted justice for everything Orion destroyed. But the flooding water was already rising around their boots. Ghost nudged Ethan's hand firmly. Time to move. Ethan looked at Briggs one final time. You should have told the truth. Briggs stared at the dark monitors quietly. Men like me stopped believing in truth a long time ago. Ethan turned and ran with Ghost through the rear service tunnel as freezing water flooded the operations chamber behind them. The narrow passage climbed sharply upward beneath the mountains while alarms echoed farther away with every step. Ghost stayed beside Ethan the entire climb despite limping heavily now. Finally, cold night air rushed toward them ahead. Ethan shoved open the emergency hatch at the top of the tunnel and climbed out onto the northern ridge overlooking the lake. Rain still hammered the forest below. Seconds later, a deep rumble shook the mountainside. The ground trembled beneath Ethan's boots as lights beneath the lake disappeared one by one into darkness. The Orion facility was gone. Ethan stood silently in the storm beside Ghost while distant emergency vehicles approached from Blackwood County far below. Dawn slowly began breaking through the clouds over the mountains, pale gray light spreading across the trees. Ghost sat beside Ethan overlooking the lake in complete silence. After everything they survived, neither of them needed words anymore. Ethan rested one hand gently against the old tactical harness still wrapped around the German Shepherd's chest. Come on, partner, he whispered softly. Let us go home.